The room was tense, every word hanging in the air like glass about to shatter. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her tone measured, her argument unfolding with the rhythm of calm precision. And then, like a blade slashing through cloth, Stephen Miller cut her off. Again. His voice surged over hers, heavy with arrogance, drowning her mid-sentence as if her words carried no weight. The chamber stiffened. This was not the first time he had done it, and the frustration rippled across faces. On both sides of the room, it was the sixth interruption. For a brief moment, the silence after his outburst was more deafening than his words. Crockett's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in the steady composure of someone who knows that dignity is its own weapon. Her lips parted as though she might speak again, but then she paused. The cameras zoomed in, the microphones caught the faint intake of breath, and the nation watching from home could sense it. Something was about to happen. Miller, smug in his certainty, leaned back as if victorious. He had spoken over her 6 times already, each interruption an attempt to shrink her presence, to bury her truth beneath his bravado. But what he did not see, what he could not understand, was that each time he tried to silence her, he was only sharpening the moment to come. Viewers at home felt it in their bones, that creeping sense of anticipation when a story tilts on the edge of transformation. The narrator's voice slips into the audience's ear, almost a whisper. "What?" Jasmine said next would silence the entire chamber. The screen holds on Crockett's face, her emerald eyes flashing not with rage but with an unshakable calm, the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Around her, whispers stir, as aides shuffle papers, as Miller shifts in, his seat with the overconfidence of someone who thinks he has already won. But a storm is building in the silence, and the nation watching can feel the weight of it pressing down. On Twitter, hashtags spark to life. Let her speak. Crockett versus Miller. Clips of his interruptions have already begun circulating, audiences reacting with disbelief, frustration, and solidarity. The interruption wasn't just a moment inside the chamber, it was now a national conversation. And yet no one, not the chamber, not the commentators, not even Miller himself, could predict the force of the 7th exchange. Because Crockett's next line wasn't simply a rebuttal, it was a turning point, a flash of truth so piercing. It would expose Miller's arrogance for what it was. The room would not simply hear her, they would feel her. And when it came, the silence that followed would be louder than any interruption he had thrown before. But before we get to the line that stops Stephen Miller cold, you need to see how we got there. Jasmine Crockett did not walk into that chamber to play games. She came armed with something sharper than rhetoric: clarity. In her presence there is a calm that unsettles the arrogant, a patience that exposes the weakness of those who hide behind noise. Every syllable she delivers carries weight, because she doesn't speak to hear herself talk. She speaks to anchor truth in a room that often floats away from it. Her composure is not weakness. It is discipline forged by battles outside those marble walls, battles where voices like hers have been told to wait their turn, to lower their volume, to accept being overlooked. But Jasmine Crockett refuses to be invisible, and that refusal radiates through her presence. When the camera lingers on her, viewers at home see a woman who embodies dignity in motion. Her voice does not tremble, even when met with hostility. Her words are sharp but not reckless, the way a surgeon's blade is sharp, precise, deliberate, devastatingly effective. For those who have been silenced, who have been interrupted in conference rooms, in classrooms, in the workplace, her poise feels personal. She is not just speaking for herself. She is carrying the weight of every woman who has ever been told to wait, every immigrant dismissed as irrelevant, every voice of color minimized by arrogance. And across from her sits Stephen Miller. If Crockett is stillness before the storm, Miller is the storm's thunder, loud, jarring, but ultimately just noise reverberating against stronger structures. His reputation precedes him. An interrupter, a master of condescension, a man whose tongue is sharper than his reason. His confidence feeds on dominance, the kind that believes talking over someone is the same as defeating them. He knows the camera is on, and he relishes it. His interruptions timed with the arrogance of someone who thinks control is measured in decibels. To him, volume is victory, and dismissal is power. The clash between them was never just about policy or debate. It was symbolic. On one side, Crockett, dignity, truth, representation. On the other, Miller, arrogance, bigotry, disguised as confidence, a practiced contempt for anyone who refuses to bow to his interruptions. The tension was not accidental. It was the inevitable collision of two forces destined to expose each other. Inside the chamber, aides shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as Miller's interruptions began. Papers rustled louder than usual. Pens tapped nervously against notepads as if everyone wanted to puncture the tension, but no one dared to breathe too loudly. A low murmur traveled the room. Is he really cutting her off again? The disbelief wasn't whispered once. It echoed across the chamber like ripples in water. Outside the chamber, the digital arena erupted in real time. Tweets fired like sparks. He won't even let her finish a sentence. This is beyond disrespect. Jasmine Crockett is handling this with more composure than I ever could. Hashtags began to form organically, swelling as clips of Miller's dismissive gestures looped again and again. And within those loops, Crockett's steady resolve grew sharper. Viewers did not just watch, they took sides. The villain was writing his own role, one interruption at a time. The polarity of the moment could not have been clearer. Crockett represented every underdog who had ever faced condescension with grace. Miller embodied every dismissive voice that ever tried to talk someone into silence. Their collision was electric, each moment tightening the rope of suspense. Who would the chamber remember? The man who shouted loudest, or the woman who stood firmest? Narrators of history often say you cannot see turning points as they unfold. But in this room, on that day, everyone watching knew something was building. The interruptions were piling up, one after another, like waves crashing against a cliff face that refused to crumble. Crockett remained unbroken, her calm becoming more dangerous with each attack. Miller, perhaps unknowingly, was escalating toward the moment where his arrogance would finally meet its match. And yet, no one, neither those inside the chamber nor the millions watching outside, could predict just how far Miller would push. He would not stop at one interruption, or two, or three. But no one expected Miller would go so far. Not once, not twice, but 6 times. The first interruption came like a test. Jasmine Crockett had only just begun to lay the foundation of her argument. Her voice measured, her words deliberate. She had drawn the chamber into her rhythm, a calm cadence that compelled listening. But then, slicing across her sentence, Stephen Miller's voice barged in. It wasn't a question. It wasn't clarification. It was intrusion. A sharp, arrogant dismissal, as though the very sound of her speaking was an offense to him. Heads turned. The quiet gasp of disbelief rolled through the room. Crockett stopped mid-word, her lips still parted, her eyes steady on him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't mirror his aggression. She simply waited, letting his arrogance echo into an uneasy silence. And when he finished, she resumed as though nothing had happened, her dignity intact, his interruption exposed for what it was. Viewers at home felt the sting. Social media lit up almost instantly. Did he really just cut her off like that? He can't handle a strong woman speaking truth. Clips of the exchange began circulating within minutes, gathering thousands of views before she had even finished her sentence. The first interruption had not silenced her, it had amplified her. But Miller didn't see it that way. He mistook her composure for weakness, her silence during his outburst for surrender, and so he prepared himself for more. The second interruption came harder, meaner, dripping with impatience. Crockett had shifted her argument into sharper focus, citing specifics with razor clarity when Miller leaned forward and snapped over her words. This time, the chamber bristled. A few aides looked down at their notes, trying to pretend the disrespect wasn't hanging heavy in the air. Others exchanged quick glances that said what no one dared to say aloud. This is getting out of hand. Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice, when she reclaimed the floor, was steadier than ever. Calm, unshaken, her words now carried the added weight of contrast. His noise against her truth. On Twitter, hashtags surged. Let her speak began trending. Interruptions don't equal intelligence. People weren't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides. And with every side chosen, the story was no longer confined to the chamber. It was spilling into the nation's living rooms, phones, and hearts. Crockett's dignity became the rallying point. Miller's arrogance became the foil. By the third interruption, the pattern had become undeniable. Crockett had barely begun. Her thought when Miller lunged in again, louder this time, almost desperate. His voice cracked with a forced authority, the kind that masks insecurity with aggression. The chamber's tension thickened. A staffer's pen snapped in their hand, knuckles white from gripping too hard. Someone muttered under their breath, a sigh of exhaustion with his antics. And Crockett, still unshaken, let him finish. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him, as if cataloging every second of his impatience, every ounce of his arrogance. Then she spoke again, not louder, but clearer, her tone rising above his disrespect without needing to shout. The effect was magnetic. Viewers online clipped the exchange into memes, captions blazing, "This is what composure looks like." Others wrote, "He interrupts because he's afraid of the truth." The digital audience had turned the clash into a morality play, with Crockett cast as the embodiment of resilience and Miller as the caricature of fragile power. Each interruption became a mini-drama, a ritual humiliation for the interrupter, a small victory for the interrupted. The rhythm was unmistakable now. She speaks, he slices in, the chamber recoils, she reclaims. It was a dance of dominance and dignity, and though Miller believed he was leading, the audience knew otherwise. Every time Crockett regained her voice, the imbalance tipped further in her favor. She was winning not with volume, but with restraint, and yet the escalation was clear. Miller was not learning. He was doubling down, convinced that louder meant stronger, that faster meant smarter. He didn't see the chamber's growing discomfort, didn't hear the murmurs of disapproval, didn't recognize that each interruption was isolating him further. He thought he was controlling the narrative. In reality, he was writing himself into the villain's role, and Crockett was becoming the voice the nation was rooting for. The tension hung thick, the air charged with the expectation that something had to give. And just when the room thought it couldn't get more chaotic, interruption number 4 shattered the chamber. The fourth interruption arrived not as a slip of impulse, but as a deliberate strike. Jasmine Crockett had gathered momentum, her words flowing with the authority of someone who knows the power of restraint. She was finally threading together the point she had been denied space to make when Miller lunged forward again, slicing across her with the abruptness of a blade through silk. His voice carried a sharper edge this time, not just condescension but a strain of panic, an urgency. To claw back control slipping through his hands, the chamber jolted. This wasn't irritation anymore. This was desperation. Crockett stopped mid-sentence, her hand resting lightly on the desk, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. For the first time, she allowed a sliver of steel into her expression. Her patience, though deep, was not infinite. She straightened, eyes locked on Miller with the composure of a storm contained, and then, with deliberate calm, she reclaimed her space. not by raising her voice but by lowering it, her words steady as stone. The contrast cut deeper than any outburst could. The audience watching from home erupted. Tweets surged with disbelief. 4 times. 4 times. How is this allowed? Others raged. He's terrified of what she has to say. That's why he keeps cutting her off. And beneath the outrage pulsed admiration. Her calm is legendary. She's teaching us all how to handle disrespect. Each interruption was no longer just an affront to Crockett. It was a collective injury felt by millions who saw themselves in her. But Miller didn't stop. The 5th interruption crashed in like thunder. Crockett's voice had taken on that new edge, calm but unyielding, patience stripped away, replaced with steel, and Miller sensed it. He could feel the tide shifting, and rather than pause, he charged. His words stumbled over hers with a frantic rhythm. Faster now, his tone sharper, his face flushed with exertion. He leaned forward in his chair, his gestures jagged, as though volume and aggression could mask the cracks forming in his performance. The chamber bristled in visible discomfort. A woman in the back row shook her head slowly. Disbelief etched into her features. An aide scribbled furious notes, pretending focus but clearly rattled by the tension that electrified the air. Others exchanged quick glances that carried the weight of unspoken frustration. When will this stop? The atmosphere had shifted from irritation to something heavier. Anger, exhaustion, disbelief colliding all at once. Online, the reaction spiraled into outrage. This is beyond disrespect. It's harassment. He's unraveling on live TV, and she's still standing tall. Memes appeared within minutes, side-by-side clips of Crockett's calm against Miller's unraveling aggression. The audience was no longer passive. They were participating, narrating, reshaping the clash into a story larger than the room. Through it all, Crockett did not flinch. She leaned into her words with the weight of authority. Her tone sharpened now, her patience replaced with precision. When she spoke, her voice carried steel, measured, deliberate, cutting through Miller's noise without needing to rise above it. The chamber heard her. Viewers felt her. Miller's words, in contrast, fell flat, dissipating into the discomfort he himself had created. But then came the 6th interruption. It didn't crash in like the 4th, nor thunder like the 5th. It exploded. Crockett was mid-argument, her voice steady, her tone now unwavering steel, when Miller burst across her again, louder, harsher, with the desperation of a man clinging to dominance that was slipping like sand through his fingers. His words overlapped hers completely, swallowing her in noise. He leaned forward so far it seemed as if he might leap from his seat, his gestures wild, his face taut with forced control. The chamber snapped. Gasps rippled across the room, the kind of sound people make when they witness not just disrespect, but the moment arrogance tips into collapse. Several members shifted uncomfortably, unable to mask their disgust. A senator whispered audibly, "Unbelievable," as the tension pressed into every corner of the chamber. It was no longer just a clash of voices. It was a moral spectacle. Miller was unraveling in real time, and Crockett, still steady, still grounded, was becoming the mirror to his collapse. The emotional whiplash for the audience was overwhelming. Frustration surged into fury. Anger boiled into solidarity. How many times will he try to silence her? Tweets demanded, the question echoing across timelines. Others reframed it as the lesson of the night. This is what every woman faces. In boardrooms, in offices, in politics, and look at how she's handling it. The clash had become universal. Crockett embodying dignity under fire, Miller embodying the fragility of unchecked arrogance. And yet, Crockett did not explode. That was the brilliance of her response. She could have shouted. She could have thrown back fire. But instead, she drew on the steel within her voice, letting the weight of composure crush his noise. Her eyes locked on him, her words sharper than ever, every syllable landing with the force of truth sharpened by restraint. The chamber was buzzing now, the unease so thick it hummed in the air. Crockett's composure was no longer just patience, it was defiance, a refusal to let disrespect rewrite the balance of power. In that moment, everyone watching knew something had to break. 6 interruptions had tested the boundaries of decorum, of respect, of patience. Miller believed he was dominating, but what the audience saw was collapse. Each interruption had stripped him further, exposed him more. Crockett, in contrast, had grown taller with each attempt to silence her. The stage was set. The chamber was buzzing, the viewers were glued, the nation was holding its breath. But it was the 7th moment, her final line, that flipped the entire balance of power in the room. It came after a silence so thick the chamber itself seemed to lean forward, waiting to see whether Jasmine Crockett would finally break. 6 interruptions had carved deep grooves into the moment, each one a slash against her composure, each one daring her to shatter. And yet she did not. Instead, she drew a single breath, deep and unhurried, as though gathering not only her voice but the voices of everyone ever silenced by arrogance. Then it happened. The 7th exchange. Miller lunged. Once more, his words tumbling over hers in a frenzy, his voice jagged with desperation. He was louder, harsher, pressing with the energy of a man certain that force could pass for truth. But Crockett did not yield. This time, she did not pause to let his outburst crash and burn. She cut through it, her voice, steady and sharp, carried across the chamber like a bell ringing in the stillness after a storm. One sentence, crisp, undeniable. It was not shouted. It was not decorated with fury. It was delivered with surgical precision, the exact words that pulled the oxygen from Miller's noise and redirected it back to her command. The chamber froze. 4. The first time all day, Miller stopped mid-motion. His hand hung in the air, fingers curled as though caught in the act of another interruption. His jaw stiffened, but no sound came. He blinked once, his eyes flicking downward, the faintest crack. In the armor of arrogance, the silence that followed was deafening, more powerful than any argument, louder than any speech. That silence told the story. In the back row, an aide dropped their pen, the clatter echoing like punctuation on the moment. Someone else inhaled, sharply, then stopped themselves, as though afraid even breath might disrupt the scene. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, stunned by the sudden stillness. And then the wave hit. The realization that what they had just witnessed was not merely an exchange but a transformation. Miller, the interrupter, had been silenced. Crockett, the interrupted, had become the voice of command. Within seconds, the replay began to circulate. News outlets clipped the moment with feverish speed, broadcasting her words in looping highlight reels. On Twitter, hashtags detonated. Ashri, 7th line. Crockett, moment. Exuhag mic drop. Memes poured in, screenshots of Miller's frozen expression beside captions like, "When arrogance meets reality," and "The look of a man defeated by dignity." GIFs replayed the instant she delivered her line, the internet crowning it. The political mic drop of the year. Commentators erupted across platforms. Some praised her as the embodiment of resilience. This is why representation matters. Jasmine Crockett is proof that calm truth will always outshine arrogance. Others marveled at the precision of her words. She didn't just shut him down. She rewrote the power dynamic in that room with one line. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves nodding, unable to deny the cinematic finality of the moment. Miller's camp tried to spin it, but the visual spoke louder than any statement. The clip of him frozen, silenced mid-interruption, became the indelible image, No press release, no counter-argument could erase what millions had already seen. And at the center of it all stood Crockett, not gloating, not smirking, not even acknowledging the victory. She simply continued, her composure intact, her dignity radiating through the airwaves. That restraint, that refusal to revel in triumph, made the moment even more powerful. She wasn't fighting for a point scored. She was fighting for the right to speak, and in winning that, she had won something larger. The silence that followed her line became a silence filled with meaning. It was the silence of a chamber recognizing. It had crossed into history. It was the silence of viewers at home whispering to themselves, "That's how you do it." It was the silence that precedes applause, except here the applause came not from clapping hands but from millions of voices online, amplifying her victory into every corner of the digital sphere. For progressives, for immigrants, for women, for every marginalized voice that had ever been told to sit down or to stay quiet, the seventh line became more than a political moment. It became vindication, proof that dignity could hold against arrogance, proof that patience could sharpen into steel, proof that voices once dismissed could rise and cut through the noise with undeniable power. Miller sat back, silent, his lips pressed into a line, his hands folding in front of him. For the first time he looked small, not because he had shrunk, but because Crockett's stature had grown. In that instant, the villain of arrogance had been dwarfed by the hero of composure. And the chamber felt it. The buzz of whispers that followed was different from before. It was no longer disbelief at his interruptions, but awe at her control. A senator leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "That's the line they'll be talking about for years." Staffers, who had tried to hide their discomfort during Miller's tirades, now glanced at one another with restrained smiles, silently acknowledging that they had witnessed something rare, the triumph of dignity in real time. The moment replayed on loop across America. In bars, on phones, in break rooms, families and co-workers gathered to watch the clip. They mouthed her words in sync, celebrated the silence that followed, replayed Miller's stunned expression with laughter and relief. For them, it was more than entertainment. It was a reminder that arrogance could be defeated without rage, that truth could stand tall even under fire. Jasmine Crockett had not just silenced Stephen Miller. She had given millions the feeling of being seen, heard, validated, and that feeling is not easily forgotten. But the aftermath, what came hours later online and across the country, was just as explosive. The moment did not end inside that chamber. In truth, the chamber was only the spark. What followed was a firestorm. Within minutes of Crockett's seventh line cutting through the chaos, social media lit up. Twitter's trending page was swallowed whole by her name. Hagage Jasmine Crockett, you seventh line. Eat a mic drop moment. Commentators across the spectrum, journalists, late-night hosts, influencers, and everyday citizens grabbed the clip and replayed it endlessly. The 15-second exchange became a digital anthem, carried in memes, GIFs, stitched TikToks, and earnest political breakdowns. On Instagram, fan edits highlighted Crockett's calm expression, overlaying captions like "Grace under fire" and "Dignity is louder than arrogance." TikTok creators paired the clip with triumphant soundtracks, violin swelling, beats dropping at the exact moment Miller fell silent. Even teenagers, far removed from the political details, were posting reaction videos with captions like, "This is how you shut down a bully." By evening, cable networks were replaying the footage on loop. Analysts leaned into slow-motion replays, circling Miller's stunned pause, freeze-framing Crockett's calm, unwavering gaze. On CNN, a commentator declared, "This isn't just a political exchange, it's a cultural reset." On MSNBC, she was called the new voice of strength. Even critics who normally bristled at her politics admitted the optics were undeniable. Miller, the aggressor, looked petty. Crockett, the target, looked unbreakable. And that, perhaps, was the real story. Because beyond the politics of left and right, what resonated with millions was the symbolism. This wasn't just about one woman versus one man. It was about voice versus silence, dignity versus arrogance, representation versus suppression. Crockett, a black woman in a space historically dominated by white male power, had been interrupted again and again. Yet she never allowed her voice to vanish. She did not shout Miller down. She forced him into silence by the sheer authority of her poise. The clash distilled a broader cultural tension. In workplaces, schools, and homes across America, people recognized themselves in that moment. The woman who had been spoken over in meetings, the immigrant whose accent was mocked, the young activist dismissed by an older establishment voice. Crockett's triumph became theirs too, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response is not volume, but precision, not anger, but unyielding clarity. The internet swelled with personal testimonies. One user wrote, "I showed this to my daughter. She said, 'That's me in debate class when the boys won't stop talking over me.'" Another posted, "This is why we fight for representation, because when people like Jasmine are in the room, they carry all of us with them." The ripple effect stretched beyond digital applause. By the next day, opinion pieces were hailing the confrontation as a watershed. Editorials framed Crockett as a rising icon of resilience, someone whose refusal to bend under pressure had crystallized into a viral emblem. Politico called it a modern masterclass in composure. The Atlantic described it as a reminder that history doesn't always turn on grand speeches, it often turns on single sentences. In classrooms, professors clipped the moment into lectures about rhetoric and gender dynamics. In community centers, activists replayed it as a motivational tool. In campaign strategy sessions, advisors dissected Crockett's delivery as an example of how dignity can disarm even the most aggressive opposition, and while praise flowed, so did the backlash. Miller's defenders tried to recast the scene, arguing that Crockett had overreacted, that interruptions were part of politics. But the visual was inescapable. His repeated aggression, her unwavering calm. The audience, millions strong, had already decided where the moral authority lay. In the weeks that followed, Crockett's profile rose. She was no longer just another name in Congress. She was an icon of resilience, proof that integrity could win against arrogance even in the most hostile of arenas. That single moment reshaped her public identity. Supporters compared her to past figures who had crystallized into symbols in a flash, individuals whose courage at a critical moment echoed far beyond their immediate fight. And yet, this story is not simply about her nor about Miller. It is not only about politics, nor just about gender or race. The true weight of the clash lies in what it revealed about all of us. The hunger for voices that refuse to be silenced, the longing for dignity in a culture of disruption, the relief that comes when composure finally eclipses arrogance. Crockett may have stood alone at the microphone, but millions stood with her in spirit. And yet, the true lesson of this clash goes far beyond two people in a room. In the end, what lingered was not the shouting, not the interruptions, not the tension of the chamber. What lingered was the stillness that followed her seventh line. That pause, that frozen silence, carried more power than all of Miller's words combined. It was proof that dignity, when defended, becomes a force larger than the moment itself. Why does this matter? Because every society is shaped not only by the loudest voices, but by the ones who refuse to be drowned out. Crockett's calm defiance reminded America that courage does not always roar. It sometimes speaks in measured, unshakable tones. Her composure revealed something essential about power, that it shifts not through bluster, but through clarity. This was never just about a politician checking an opponent. It was about something deeper. about what happens when disrespect meets resistance, and resistance chooses not rage, but resolve. In that chamber, Crockett represented every person who has ever been interrupted, dismissed, or underestimated. Her victory was symbolic, but its meaning was real. You do not have to shout to win. You have to stand tall, rooted in truth. Moments like these remind us what it means to be American. At our best, we are a nation that thrives when truth is spoken boldly, when voices once silenced rise to be heard. Americanness is not about dominance. It is about dignity. It is not about suppressing others. It is about listening, even when uncomfortable. Crockett's poise in the face of disrespect echoed those values, showing that the strength of democracy rests in the strength of its people to hold their ground. For those watching, the lesson was unmistakable. Courage is contagious. Her resilience traveled beyond those chamber walls and into living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces. It told viewers that respect is not given by those in power. It is claimed by those who refuse to surrender it. And in that sense, Crockett's seventh line was more than a retort. It was a reminder that dignity is the one weapon arrogance cannot disarm. The confrontation may fade from headlines, as all viral moments eventually do, but its echo will last. People will remember the way she did not flinch, the way silence fell, heavy after her words, the way truth cut through noise. They will remember because, deep down, we all crave examples of grace under pressure, of integrity that refuses to bow. And maybe, just maybe, that's why her seventh line will echo long after the noise of interruption has faded.